Chapter 10. The Major. On the following day I was seized by a burning desire to again see the woman whom I had so strangely grown to love. Time after time I discussed the matter with Bob, and he was full of my opinion that I might, by watching my wife's movements, discover some fact which might give me a clue. I proposed to Bob that I should go straight to her and make a full explanation, but he urged patience and diplomacy. "Go down to Whitton and watch her at a distance if you like," he answered. "But be very careful that you are not recognized. No man cares to be spied upon. In this matter you must exercise the greatest discretion if you really intend to get to the bottom of this puzzling affair." "I do intend to solve the enigma," I declared. "If I'm 10 years over it, I mean to claim Theo as my wife." "You can't do that until you've obtained absolute proof." "And in the meantime, Wind and his accomplice may make another attempt upon her life," I observed dubiously. "Forewarned is forearmed," he answered. "It seems your duty to act in secret as her protector." "Exactly. That's my object in going down to Whitton. Somehow I feel sure that her life is insecure, for the facts plainly show that Wind's motive was to get rid of her." "Without a doubt. Go down to Hounslow tomorrow and discover what you can regarding these friends of hers, the Chetwodes, and their associates. In inquiries of this sort you must carefully work back." Now I had for years rather prided myself upon my shrewdness. I had often set myself the task of clearing up those little unimportant mysteries of life which occur to every man, and more than once while at hospital I had rendered service to the police in their inquiries. That same afternoon, while Bob was out visiting his patients, I chanced to put my hand in the ticket pocket of my frock coat and felt something there. The coat was the one I had worn when called out to become the husband of Theo Ashwick, and from the pocket I drew a half-smoked cigarette. I am not in the habit of placing cigarette ends in my pockets, and could not at first account for its presence there. But on examination I saw that it was the remains of an unusual brand, for upon the paper were tiny letters in Greek printed in blue ink. A second's reflection, however, decided me. It was the cigarette which the Major had given me. It had gone out while I had been speaking, and with it in my hand I had rushed upstairs to my wife's room, and instead of casting it away I had, I suppose, thrust it into my pocket, where it had remained unheeded until that moment. I examined it with the utmost care and great interest. Then I descended to Bob's little dispensary at the back of the house, and finding a microscope took out some of the tobacco and placed it beneath the lens. Tiny but distinct crystals were revealed clinging to the finely cut tobacco, crystals of some subtle poison which, dissolved by the saliva while on the act of smoking, entered the system. The cigarette had narrowly proved fatal to me. At once I lit the spirit lamp, cleaned and dried some test tubes, and set busily to work to make solutions with the object of discovering the drug. But although I worked diligently the whole afternoon, and Bob, on returning, assisted me, we were unable to determine exactly what it was. The remainder of the cigarette, including the paper bearing the mark of the manufacturer, I carefully preserved, and on the following morning went down to Hounslow to ascertain what I could regarding my unconscious wife. Bob remained at Rowan Road to look after his patients, but declared his intention of relieving me if any watching were required. Therefore I went forth eager to ascertain some fact that would lead me to the knowledge of the truth. Hounslow, although but a dozen miles from Charing Cross, was, I found, a dull, struggling place, the dismal quiet of which was only relieved by a few boisterous militiamen in its long street. I took up my quarters at the historic Red Lion, and over a whisky and soda made inquiries of the plethoric landlord as to the whereabouts of Whitton. It lay beyond the town, halfway towards Twickenham, he told me. "There's a Whitton Park, isn't there?" I inquired. "Yes. Colonel Chetwode's place. That's just before you get to Whitton Church." "It's a large house, I suppose?" "Oh, yes. He's the squire there, and magistrate and all that." "I've heard his name," I said, "but I've never seen him. What sort of man is he?" "Oh, a bit standoffish, tall, thin, and grey-haired. We hotel keepers don't like him because he's always down on us on the licensing days over at Brentford," the man replied, chewing his cheap cigar. He's married, isn't he?
Yes. He married his second wife about 3 years ago. She's a good-looking woman with reddish hair. They say she doesn't get on very well with the Colonel's grown-up son.
Oh, I remarked, at once interested. How old is the son?
Oh, about 25. He's a jolly fellow, he is. He's a lieutenant in the 7th Hussars, and they're stationed here just now. He often comes in and gets a drink when he passes.
And he doesn't hit it off well with his stepmother.
Oh, no. I've heard some queer stories about their quarrels from the servants, he answered.
He was a gossip, like all landlords of inns, and seemed extremely communicative because I had asked him to drink with me. The effect of a shilling spent upon drink is oftentimes amazing. Stepmothers are generally intruders, I laughed.
Well, things came to pass down at the park about a month or 2 ago that Mrs. Chetwood demanded that the Colonel should turn young Mr. Cyril out of the house and threatened that if he did not, she would leave. The Colonel, so it said, grew furious, stormed down the place, and in the end Mrs. Chetwood packed her trunks and went with Sherman, her maid, to Switzerland. About 3 weeks ago the Colonel followed her and brought her back, so I suppose they've made it up.
Do they entertain many friends?
Oh, yes, there's always visitors there. They're so near to London, you see.
Do you know the names of any of the visitors? I inquired, adding, I think a friend of mine comes down to see them sometimes. Sir Pierrepoint Lane?
Oh, yes, he said. I've seen both Sir Henry and his wife driving. They've got a place somewhere near Wiltshire, I've heard. They're great friends of Mrs. Chetwood's.
And there's a Miss Ashwick that comes with them, I said eagerly. Do you know her?
I may know her by sight, the man replied, but I don't know her by name.
She's tall, blue-eyed, with golden-brown hair, very pretty and always very smartly dressed.
Yes, she wears a big black hat and very often a drab-colored dress. When she smiles, she shows her teeth very prettily, he said.
That's her, no doubt.
Well, he said, her description is exact. She's Mr. Cyril's young lady.
What? I cried, starting up in surprise.
When she's down here, she's always about the Colonel's son, and everybody says they're engaged, he went on. The servants have told me that they are a most devoted couple.
But is that lady the same one that I mean? I inquired dubiously.
I don't know her surname, but her Christian name is Miss Beryl.
Beryl! I gasped. Could this be the actual truth, that she was engaged to young Chetwood? Beryl. Then she was evidently known here by the name in which she had married me, Beryl Wynd. Is she often here? I asked at last, when I found my voice again. I was so upset by this statement that with difficulty I remained calm.
Oh, yes, very often, especially now that Mr. Cyril is at the barracks. They ride out together every morning, and are very often about in the town in the afternoon. You'll no doubt see them.
Ah, I said, with the object of misleading my garrulous informant. It can't be the lady I mean, as her name is not Beryl.
The description is very much like her,
he observed, knocking the ash from his cigar. Is there any talk of young Chetwood marrying? I inquired.
Well, yes, there are rumors, of course, he answered. Some say the Colonel is against it, while others say that Mrs. Chetwood is jealous of her stepson, so no one doesn't know exactly what to believe.
I suppose you hear a lot of gossip about them, huh?
Oh, a lot. Much, too, that ain't true, he laughed. Why, somebody said once that Miss Beryl was the daughter of an officer who got sent to penal servitude.
Who said that? I said, at once pricking up my ears. Was it not Major Tattersett who had accompanied her to the registry at Doctors' Commons, and who had given me that cigarette?
Oh, it was a story that got about.
Did they say who the officer was, or what was his offence?
He was a major in the Guards, they said.
You didn't hear his name?
No, I've never heard her name. Everybody here knows her as Miss Beryl, but it would be easy enough to find out.
And rising, he leant forward into the tap-room, where a rural postman was sitting, hot and dusty, drinking ale from a pewter, and shouted,
I say, Alan, what's the name of Mr. Chetwood's young lady?
The young lady that's so often at the park? Why, Miss Beryl Wynd. I sat motionless for moments. The truth seemed plain, that she had allowed herself to be introduced to me at Gloucestershire Square under an alias. For what reason, I wondered? She was undoubtedly in love with this young lieutenant of hussars. If so, then she would seek to preserve the secret of her marriage and even repudiate it if necessary. The rumors of her being the daughter of a disgraced officer was another curious feature. It almost appeared as if there were some truth underlying it.
"You hear what the postman says, sir?" observed the landlord, turning to me again. "He knows because he delivers the letters at the park. Her name is Wind. Funny name, isn't it?"
"Yes," I answered mechanically, for the discovery that this young Chetwold was the accepted suitor of my love was a staggering blow. What could I do? How should I act? She was my wife by law. Mine. I rose, announcing that I was going for a stroll, and walked unsteadily out into the long, deserted street. I wandered down the Hanforth Road, past rows of cottages with gardens filled with flowers, to the station, and, crossing the bridge, soon found myself before the old-fashioned lodge at the entrance to Witton Park. I was curious to investigate the place, and, noticing that the lodge-keeper's house was shut, while one of the smaller of the great ornamental iron gates stood open, I strolled in, continuing up the avenue for a quarter of a mile or so, when suddenly the drive swept round past a pretty lake, and I came in full view of the house. It was a splendid old Elizabethan mansion. Before it was a pretty old-world garden with an ancient sundial in the centre, while to the right was a well-kept modern tennis court where people were playing, while afternoon tea was being served to the remainder of the house party. There were fully a dozen people there, the men in flannels and the women in cool muslins with bright sunshades. Risks of detection, however, prevented me from approaching close enough to clearly distinguish the faces of the hostess and her guests. Therefore I stood hidden by the bushes, watching the game, trying in vain to catch a glimpse of the countenances of the chattering circle of tea-drinkers. Suddenly a figure in pale yellow rose crossed to the side of a foppishly dressed young man, who, sitting somewhat apart, was smoking and intently watching the game. The smartness of the figure, the narrow waist, wide hips, and swinging gait were familiar. Although I could not distinguish her features, I knew that it was my wife, the woman who was ignorant of her marriage and whom I loved with such a fond, mad passion. The man rose, pulled a chair forward for her, and they both sat down together to chat. He fetched her some tea, and then sat hugging his knees, apparently engrossed in conversation. She seemed to hold him beneath the spell of her marvellous beauty, just as she held me. Could it be that that man, whose face I could not see clearly, was Cyril Chetwold, her lover? I was standing there, my eyes riveted upon the pair, when the sound of a footstep on the gravel caused me to turn quickly. Someone was approaching. I at once drew back behind the trunk of a great elm near which I was standing, for my discovery as an intruder might upset all my plans. The figure came forward slowly, for I could hear that they were deliberate footsteps, as though of a person waiting and pacing up and down. I peeped out to ascertain who it was, and as I did so, the figure of a man in a soft felt hat and a suit of grey tweed came cautiously into view. My heart leapt up in quick surprise. It was the man who, by giving me that cigarette, had made that dastardly attempt upon my life that had been so nearly successful, the man of whom I had been in active search, Major Tattersett. A single eyeglass was still in his eye, and his hat was set upon his head as jauntily as on the day when we had first met, but for the eagerness of his countenance as he gazed forward to where my wife sat, I saw that he was not one of the house party, and felt confident that his presence there was with secret and evil intent. Chapter 11. Voices of the Night. From my place of concealment I was able to watch the Major closely without risk of detection. His presence there boded no good. He had crept slowly up the avenue until within sight of the house, and was intently scanning the gay party assembled on the lawn. Was it possible that he had walked behind me and watched me enter there? He was scarcely as smart in appearance as on the day when he led my bride up the aisle of the church, and had afterwards handed me the cigarette, but nevertheless he retained the distinctly foppish air of the man about town. For a few moments only he remained there eagerly scanning the distant group, and then, as though reassured, he turned on his heel and retraced his steps towards the lodge. Determined to watch his movements, I followed him until he gained Hounslow Station, and there I saw him turn into a low-built, old-fashioned inn, where I afterwards discovered he had been staying for a couple of days. That some conspiracy was being formed I could not doubt, therefore I set myself to keep strict watch upon him. No easy matter, for from hour to hour I feared that he might recognize me. It was he who had petitioned the Archbishop for the special license for our marriage. He who had, with some mysterious motive, posed as the father of the woman I now loved. Surely she must have known that he was not her father, and if so, she herself had taken part in a plot which had so nearly cost her her life. But was she not dead when I found her lying there? The puzzle was bewildering. The Major's movements might possibly give me some clue. It was fortunate that we had met. At a cheap clothier's I purchased a rough second-hand suit and a bowler hat, much worse for the wear, and these I had assumed in order to alter my appearance as much as possible. About 9 o'clock that same night, while I stood idling about the station with my eye ever upon the inn opposite, my vigilance was suddenly rewarded, for the Major emerged leisurely, carefully lit a cigar, and then strolled across the railway bridge and down the road towards Whitton. Darkness had not quite set in, therefore I hesitated to follow him, but fortunately I had explored the neighbourhood thoroughly during the past few hours, and knew that by crossing to the opposite platform of the station I could gain a footpath which led through fields and market gardens, emerging into the high road almost opposite the gates of the park. This byway I took, and, hurrying down it, arrived at the point near the lodge fully 5 minutes before he appeared along the road. The gates were, however, closed. Would he ring and demand admittance, I wondered? When about 200 yards from the gates he suddenly halted, glanced up and down the road as though to make certain that no one was watching, and then, bending down, squeezed himself through a hole in the wooden fencing and disappeared. He evidently knew that the gates were locked, and had already discovered that mode of entry, if indeed he had not broken away the palings himself earlier that day. Without hesitation I hurried forward over the grass by the roadside, so that he might not hear my footsteps, and discovering the hole in the paling, entered after him. I found myself in the midst of hawthorn bushes and thick undergrowth, but, pausing and listening intently, I soon detected which direction he had taken by the noise of breaking twigs. For some 10 minutes I remained there, fearing to move, lest the noise might alarm him, but when at last he was out of hearing I crept forward, breaking my way through in the direction of the avenue. The night was hot and so still that each sound seemed to awaken the echoes. With the greatest caution I crept on, walking noiselessly over the grass in the direction of the house. As soon as the old mansion came into view, I saw that lights burned in many of the windows, and from the drawing-rooms, where the open doors led onto the lawn, came the living strains of dance music. From where I stood I could see the high lamps with their shades of yellow silk, and now and then bright dresses flashed past the long windows. A couple of figures were strolling up and down before the house. I could see their white shirt-fronts in the darkness, and knew that they were men smoking and enjoying the night air. The 2 men at last tossed away their cigar ends and entered the house. Thus I became encouraged to approach closer, cross the lawn, and peep through one of the side windows of the drawing-room. Fully a dozen people were there, but as I gazed around I was disappointed not to see my love. I had risked discovery and detection to obtain sight of her, but she was not present, and neither was her cousin Nora. Most of the guests seemed smart people, judging from the women's toilettes, and all were lolling about with the air of laziness which overcomes one after a good dinner. Dancing had ended, and, as I watched, a young dark-haired girl approached the piano, and commenced to sing a song by which I knew that she was French. I peered in through those windows, eager for a glimpse of Beryl. Surely she was not like those others. No, I recollected her calm dignity and sweet grace when I had spoken to her. She, at least, was high-minded and womanly. I was glad she was not there to hear that song. The singer sat down, having finished, amid roars of applause, and then the conversation was resumed. But at that instant I became conscious of someone passing near me, and had only just time to draw back into the shadow and thus escape observation. It was one of the guests, a man who had lounged slowly along, the glowing end of his cigar shining in the darkness, alone. He was apparently full of recollections, for he passed slowly and mechanically onward without noticing me. Unable to see his face, I could only detect that he was rather above the average height, and by his silhouette I saw that he stooped slightly. The encounter, however, caused me to recede from the house, for I had no desire to be detected there and compelled to give an account of myself. I was in shabby clothes, and if found in the vicinity might be suspected of an intention to commit a theft. Where was the Major? He had certainly entered there, but had escaped my vigilance by passing through the thicket. I had been there only nearly half an hour, yet had not been able to rediscover him. The lawn on one side was bounded by light iron fencing, beyond which was a thick wood, and upon this fencing I mounted and sat to rest in full view of the house and the long window of the drawing-room. In the deep shadow of the trees I waited there, safe from detection, listening to the music which had recommenced, and wondering what had become of the man whom I had tried to follow. He seemed to have avoided the house and gone to the opposite side of the park. Although I could actually see into the circle of assembled guests, yet I was so far off that I could only distinguish the women by the colour of their gowns. Had Beryl returned to join them, I wondered? I was longing for a single glance at her dear face, that face sweeter than any other in the world. A woman in a cream dress, cut low at the neck, came suddenly to the doorway and peered forth into the night as though in search of someone, but a moment later had disappeared, and again the piano broke forth with a pretty minuet from Manon. I had, I felt certain, been there almost, if not quite an hour. Therefore I was resolved to take a tour of the park in an endeavour to find the man whose suspicious movements had so interested me earlier in the evening. With that object in view, I leaped down upon the lawn, crossed it until I reached the edge of the lake, which I skirted until I gained a rustic bridge which crossed the tiny brook that rippled over the stones and fell into the pool. Of a sudden I heard a sound. It was quite distinct, like a half-suppressed cough. I halted in surprise, but no other sound reached my ear. Could I have been mistaken? The noise seemed very human, yet I knew that in the darkness of night the most usual sound becomes exaggerated and distorted. Therefore, reassured, I continued my way by the narrow, unfrequented path, which, leaving the lakeside, struck across the park and led me across the stile into a dark belt of wood. Scarcely had I entered it, however, when I heard human voices distinctly. I halted and listened. An owl hooted weirdly, and there was a dead silence. I wondered whether the persons I had surprised had detected my presence. I stood upon the narrow path, holding my breath so that I could catch every sound. A couple of minutes passed. To me they seemed as hours. Then again the voices sounded away to the left, apparently on the edge of the wood. Noiselessly I retraced my steps to the stile, and found that from it there ran a path beside the iron railing, whither I knew not. But somewhere down that path 2 persons were in consultation. Treading carefully so that my footsteps could not be overheard, I crept down the path until, of a sudden, I caught sight of a woman's white dress in the gloom. Then, sufficiently close to overhear, I halted with strained ears. I was hidden behind a high hazel bush, could just distinguish against that reddish glare which shines in the sky of the outskirts of London on a summer's night 2 silhouettes, those of a man and a woman. The former had halted and was leaning against the railing, while the latter, with a shawl twisted about her shoulders, stood facing him. "If you had wished, you could certainly have met me before this," the man was grumbling. "I've waited at the stile there a solid hour. Besides, it was risky business with so many people about." "I told you not to come here," she answered, and in an instant I recognized the voice. There were the sweet musical tones of the woman who was my wife. "Of course," laughed her companion sardonically, "but you see I prefer the risk." And I knew by the deep note that the man who stood by her was the Major. "Why?" she inquired. "The risk is surely mine in coming out to meet you." "Ha! Women always make excuses," he laughed. "I should not have made this appointment if it were not imperative that we should meet." "Well," she sighed, "what do you want of me now?"
I want to talk to you seriously."
"With the usual request to follow," she observed wearily. "You want money,
"Money? Oh, no," he said with bitter sarcasm. "I can do without it. I can live on air, you know."
"That's better than prison fare, I should have thought," she answered grimly.
"Ah, now, my dear, you're sarcastic," he said with a touch of irony. "That doesn't become you."
"Well, tell me quickly what you want and let me get back, or they will miss me."
"You mean that your young lover will want to know with whom you've been flirting, huh? Well, you can mislead him again, as you've done many times before. What a fine thing it is to be an accomplished liar. I always envy people who can lie well, for they get through life so easily." He spoke in a familiar tone, as though he held her beneath an influence that was irresistible.
"I am no liar," she protested quickly. "The lies I have been compelled to tell have been at your own instigation."
"And to save yourself," he added with a dry, harsh laugh. "But I didn't bring you here for an exchange of compliments."